do you know how ace-jack actually works? Most players have no idea, they just simply hate the hand, and I mean, it's got half a pack of jacks right in it, so who can blame them? But if you pay attention to this video, I'm going to teach you how ace-jack really works, and also give you some pre-flop and post-flop tips to play this hand better, and hopefully hate this hand a lot less. Let's get started. Good morning, how are we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome back to another video in the Science of Poker series where we analyze popular starting hands from a technical point of view and also give you some tips for playing these hands even better. And today we're going to look at ace-jack, a hand that most players simply despise and find very, very complicated. So I think there are a few main reasons why people really dislike this hand. First and foremost, it's definitely near the top of the second tier hands. Consider the top tier hands, things like 10s plus, ace queen plus, ace-jack is kind of fitting right there at the top of the next category of hands down. Ace-jack can also be a little complicated because it's tough to know exactly when to play it aggressively pre-flop, especially in 3-bet and 4-bet wars, and going post-flop, its value can shift quite quickly, which can make it uncomfortable to play big pots, especially on turns and rivers. And while we could spend half a day listing all the possible reasons why people dislike this hand, I think it's really important to understand what to expect with ace-jack at the end of the day. So simply put, ace-jack should be a profitable winning hand in your database. If you have a decent sample size, this should definitely be a winning hand. It won't be nearly as high in terms of win rate as something like ace queen or ace jack, but it should definitely be profitable at the end of the day. Number two, this hand is definitely going to require solid pre-flop decision making. Mistakes pre-flop can get you into tons and tons of trouble. And then looking at post-flop, this hand really tests your post-flop ability and your skill set, especially adjusting to the board texture as it runs out. Alright, so with all that out of the way, let's spend a moment in Flopzilla Pro and look at how this hand actually hits flops. Alright, so let's first start by looking at ace-jack offsuit, and this is how the hand is going to hit across all possible flops. Let's look first and foremost at smashes, considering that 2-pair or better. Notice that's happening a whopping 4% of the time. If we also then look at single pair hands, which is mostly going to be top pair with a little bit of middle pair and a very, very little bit of third pair, notice that is happening about 29% of the time. And then when we look at draws, going from gut shots all the way up to flush draws, notice that the total amount of hits comes out to about 46%. So about half the time, give or take, ace-jack offsuit is going to end up hitting the board in some meaningful capacity, but also notice that there is a decent chunk of ace-high happening at roughly 2/3. Alright, while we have these categories already locked in, let's switch it over to ace-jack suited. You notice the overall hits increases a little bit, gets us up to about 53%, and that's largely going to be comprised of a little bit of bump in terms of made flushes being possible now because we have a suited hand, and also a lot more hits being included in terms of those 2-card flush draws at roughly 11% coming in there, whereas of course ace-jack offsuit cannot flop any 2-card flush draws. Alright, so now that you understand how ace-jack actually hits the flop, let's back up a moment and talk about some pre-flop tips, that way you can make sure you're getting to the flop correctly. Tip number 1 is to remember that ace-jack is a default open raise from all positions. If you open up the GTO Ranges app from Red Chip Poker, you see right there from 6 max, ace-jack both suited and offsuit is an open raise from all positions, even directly from under the gun. But if you're looking at the live RGTO ranges, you're going to notice that in live cash games, the solver likes the ace-jack suited as an RFI from under the gun, but not necessarily the ace-jack offsuit. Tip number 2 is to remember that ace-jack prefers heads-up pots instead of multi-way pots. Multi-way pots in general can be an absolute bear to maneuver, and even more so with ace-jack, so definitely make sure to give more consideration to actions like squeezing instead of just constantly calling with either players left to act after you or after there's already been a call in front of you. And preflop tip number 3 is to be wary of overvaluing these hands preflop, especially for your tournament life. Just in general, it's very difficult to get ace-jack all in profitably, especially as the overall stack sizes increase. So you want to be very, very wary about it. Sure, when you have very few big blinds, very easy to commit with ace-jack and feel very comfortable with it. And of course, as you get 100 big blinds plus, you're typically never committing with ace-jack preflop, but there's kind of that medium weirdish zone in tournament play that you kind of have to know who your opponent is to make a good decision here. But if you're constantly jamming ace-jack in and wondering why you're constantly getting busted out of tournaments, this is a place you might want to spend a little bit of time and effort. Alright, so that should get your wheels turning for pre-flop play, but now let's switch over to some post-flop tips you can play this hand a little bit better. Post-flop tip number 1 is that against fish, definitely make sure to go for value, assuming the board doesn't totally crap out on you. Since fish are so much more likely to continue pre-flop with hands that you absolutely dominate, things like worse Jack X and also worse Ace X, and are also more likely likely to not find the fold button with those hands, especially when they connect in some way post-flop. You can typically get 3 streets of value. It might not necessarily be pot, 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 but you can typically get 3 streets of value against fishy opponents. Again, assuming that board doesn't totally crap out, lots of draws don't start improving, or your fishy opponent doesn't just randomly decide to start raising you, typically look to go for 3 streets. Trust me. Tip number 2 is that against non-fish, this is typically going to be a 1 to 2 street kind of value hand. So if you end up flopping something like top pair, typically this is going to be the kind of thing where it might go bet check bet, or check bet bet, or bet bet check. Those are typically going to be the lines you take against non-fish. And if you look at the solver tends to do this kind of thing as well. Usually not going to be going for 3 streets of value with ace jack unless ace jack either really starts improving or if there's something very special happening with the board. So definitely make sure to be careful with that. If you're newer to this concept or haven't really ever thought about streets of value and how much a hand might be worth, this is a concept we discussed quite a bit in core over at Red Chip Poker, and if you're interested in really solidifying your strategic foundation, if you're still building that, definitely make sure to check out core today at redchippoker.com/core to learn more and sign up. Tip number 3 is to avoid getting married to top pair when your opponent starts raising. Now, of course, this isn't to say you should just start folding every single time you have top pair and your opponent raises and you have ace jack on, say, ace xx. Rather, think about your opponent very, very carefully. Think about how they would raise, if there's any worse hands they would raise in that situation, before you just start either automatically bluff catching every single time you have top pair, or you just start automatically folding every single time. Lots of players make one of those decisions every single time. They're very, very static with it, but be dynamic to who your opponent is, what the board texture is, and what you think they're likely raising you with right this moment. And since we're talking about top pair, and honestly top pair with ace jack is one of the main reasons why people get very, very confused with this hand, why don't you watch this video next? I'll give you some tips for playing top pair on the river much, much better, and trust me, it's a video you're going to want to watch in its entirety. If you're looking to figure out how the heck to play one pair hands with ace jack, click that. Seriously, it's good.